we're against Latinos or we're against immigration, and that's not true. We're only against the illegality. And in fact, I myself am a naturalized American citizen. My parents brought me here from Canada when I was 4, and I was naturalized when they were naturalized, and so when I speak at naturalization ceremonies, I tell the people I'm also a naturalized citizen, and so I expect all of them to become statewide elected officials as well. But my parents actually were refugees from Poland. My parents were Polish Jews in the 1930s, 1938. My father was a student of history. He didn't have a lot of formal education, but he loved to read history. And because he read a lot of history, he was a very good predictor of current events. And he predicted that Germany would invade Poland. He predicted that they would invade in September 38. They actually invaded September 39. And he went around telling everybody they needed to leave. But they didn't want to leave because it's hard to leave your culture and your language to go to a new place. Even my mother didn't want to leave. My older sister was already born in Poland. She had a young daughter, and she didn't want to leave, but in those days husbands had more influence over their wives than they do now, and he made her leave. So they couldn't come into the United States right away, so they went to Canada, and all those friends and relatives that he told to leave ended up getting killed in the Holocaust, all of my extended family. And so my immediate family survived because of my father's knowledge of history. So when I was superintendent of schools, I emphasized the teaching of history because I believe that the survival of the new generation will depend on their knowledge of American history, just as the survival of my immediate family depended on my father's knowledge of history. The other thing I wanted to say about my work on the border is that I changed the budget priorities in our office, and I put more money into working with local and federal law enforcement to put a stop to the smuggling of drugs into our country. And working with them, we've had a number of important arrests. We arrested 21 people to dismantle a subsidiary of the Sinaloa cartel. The Sinaloa cartel is the largest cartel in Mexico, who had a monopoly on smuggling drugs through the Tohono O'odham Indian Reservation. You may know that's the reservation that straddles both sides of our border, and it's a very bad area for illegals coming through and for drugs coming through. And this subsidiary of the Sinaloa cartel had a monopoly in this area, and we shut down that smuggling operation. Then we arrested 7 people to dismantle a cocaine trafficking organization that were coming through Nogales every Monday and Wednesday and Friday. Never Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, always Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and they had hid cocaine in the compartments of their car. Then we arrested 76 people to dismantle a cartel that imported $2 billion in drugs. $2 billion with a B. They had a monopoly for the area from Yuma to Sells, and we shut down that operation. And then we arrested 217 people to dismantle another operation linked to the Sinaloa cartel. So you can see we're doing a lot to try to, you can't eliminate completely, but at least substantially reduce the amount of drug smuggling that comes into Arizona from Mexico. So that's my first priority, is helping to defend our border. The second priority that I spoke about was strictly enforcing the law so we're safe in our homes and our communities. And one of the things I've done in that regard is to work hard to reduce the delay between sentence and execution in capital cases, which in the Ninth Circuit, which is the circuit we're in, is what I consider to be a scandalous 18 years delay. And I'll tell you, I had a bad weekend when on a Friday night I spoke to the survivors of children that were killed in violent crime. And on Saturday night I spoke to the survivors of policemen that were killed in violent crime. And a lot of people don't realize the tremendous psychological impact on a family that loses a loved one in a sudden violent crime without warning. They experience something similar to post-traumatic stress syndrome. And if they can see justice done in a reasonable period of time, that helps their recovery. On the other hand, if there's an undue delay and they're victimized a second time by the court system, that adds to their suffering. And when I spoke about my efforts to reduce the delay, it had a lot of resonance with them. one example of that, I mentioned to you that I'm arguing a U.S. Supreme Court case in a week. I also argued one in October, so arguing 2 U.S. Supreme Court cases in a 5-month period, I'm told is something of a record. But this was a case involving an especially brutal murder, and it's 18 years later, and the wife has not been able to see justice done, and she experiences depression and rage and all kinds of emotions in the delays in seeing justice done. And finally, the Ninth Circuit gave an indefinite stay on the grounds that the prisoner mental situation had deteriorated, so he couldn't communicate with the lawyers who were pursuing his federal habeas corpus position. And in effect, meaning there never would be justice brought in the case, even though the state courts had rendered a sentence because of the interference of the federal courts. So I argued to the United States Supreme Court that they should overrule the Ninth Circuit, that most federal habeas corpus cases, including this one, don't involve a trial, they involve an appeal on the record. So the lawyer doesn't need help from the prisoner because he can read the record and get all the information he needs. And in those few cases where there is a hearing and there might be a delay, it should not be an indefinite delay. It should be a temporary delay of less than a year to try to treat the guy. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but the justice has to proceed. And I won that case unanimously. All 9 justices ruled in my favor on both of those points. And you know, when I address groups of families who had a loved one killed, and I see their resonance with them, our efforts to reduce these delays, they're the ones I care about, and as long as I'm Attorney General, I'm going to continue fighting for them and their ability to see justice done. And in addition, it doesn't do our state any good to pass laws if we can't enforce them because of interference from the federal government. So this is a theme I'll talk about a little later, about my efforts to protect Arizona from undue interference from the federal government. The third priority I spoke about was creating a legal environment that's conducive to business growth. Now what that means is if a business violates the law, obviously we prosecute them. But unlike attorneys generals in other states who try to make a reputation for themselves by attacking business, I believe my job is to help legitimate business grow, because if business succeeds, everything else succeeds. Education, the arts, everything else that we care about succeeds. And if business fails, everything else fails. So let me give you an example of something I'm talking about. Under Terry Goddard, my predecessor, who was a Democrat, there's a gentleman here from California, so I have to mention that.
Yeah, he's not a Democrat.
Terry Goddard was a Democrat.
Far from a Democrat.
A woman walked into an optometrist shop, not speaking English, and she wanted her 12-year-old son to translate for her. The owner of the shop felt that would not be safe, and he referred them to another shop with which he was associated, where they spoke Spanish. The next thing he knew, the Goddard Attorney General's office brought a civil rights complaint against him. Now, I found out about this from the lobbyist for the optometrist, Don Isaacson, you probably know. And he told me that when this happened, he went into the Attorney General's office and he said, can we do some guidelines? Because our people are law-abiding, they want to do the right thing. Who would have guessed it's a civil rights violation to not speak Spanish? Can we have some guidance? What should we do in these situations? The answer was no, they weren't interested in that, they were only interested in pursuing their case. Well, first of all, I've changed that. When somebody, a business group or an industry needs guidelines, we provide them. Now, as you can imagine, I inherited a lot of people from the Goddard administration, and they say to me, well, we're the Attorney General's office and we don't give legal advice. And I say, well, that's okay, you don't have to give legal advice, but you can give hypotheticals. If you do A, this will be our response. If you do B, this will be a response. So we can help people not engage in technical violations of the law where they're basically honest, decent people. Well, then I talked to the optometrist to find out what happened. And he said that his lawyer told him he didn't have deep enough pockets to fight the Attorney General's office, and he needed to settle. So he said, well, what do I need to do to settle? So they said, well, first of all, you have to pay $1,500 to this woman. Well, he didn't want to. You know, here she came to this country, didn't bother knowing the language. He's a small guy, why should he pay her $1,500? But he was willing to do it to settle. But then they told him, you have to translate all your documents into Spanish. And then they told him, you have to provide free translation to anyone who asks for it. And we're going to send somebody into your shop, and if you're not doing these things, we'll prosecute you to the full extent of the law. Well, he couldn't afford it, he was a little guy, so he fought. After a year, the Attorney General's office backed away. It was all a bluff. It turns out it's not a civil rights violation to not speak Spanish. But imagine the hell this guy was put through. When I took office, this all happened during the campaign, when I took office, I took his file, I read the file. You should have seen the long interrogatories that were not only a burden on him, but were, imagine the expense to the office of preparing long interrogatories in a case like that. And so one thing you can count on, as long as I'm Attorney General, never again will an honest businessman be treated in that way. And then the other example I thought I would give you, partly because I noticed some people here are interested in Agenda 21, really. Who's interested in Agenda 21? Fighting the Environment Protection Agency. I just filed an appeal from a decision of theirs to the Ninth Circuit, where they are requiring that our utilities spend $1 billion, which will greatly increase the rates that we all pay, in order to put in equipment to reduce haze. It has nothing to do with health, it's just visibility. But the amount of difference in visibility is not perceptible to the human eye. These things are measured as deciviews. You need between 2.5 and 3 deciviews to be able to see the difference. And this is only 0.9 deciviews. And they want us to spend $1 billion to put in equipment that will have no benefit to anyone. Probably the agenda is simply to destroy the coal industry. But the action is irrational. I have appealed it to the Ninth Circuit, and I'm going to fight the EPA all the way to help protect the businesses in the state of Arizona. Then the fourth thing I spoke about was consumer protection. And consumer protection to me, in a way, is a corollary of helping business, because honest business people shouldn't have to compete with dishonest ones. Part of my job as Attorney General is to create a level playing field where the free enterprise system can work. And so one of the things I've done is I've revived sting operations. Some of you, how many of you get my emails? Raise your hand if you get my emails. Okay, are they useful? Yes. So those of you who don't, if you'll give Brett or Madison your email address before we leave, we'll get you on our list. But if you've been getting our emails, you read about cases like the time we brought a car to a repair shop that we had complaints about, and we put a camera in the hood, and we put a bad fuse in. And so we could see what they were doing. They opened the hood, they could see electricity wasn't getting to the compressor. They discovered the bad fuse, they took the bad fuse out, they put a good fuse in, everything worked perfectly. They took the good fuse out, they put the bad fuse back in. They told our guy that you need to spend $700 on a new compressor that you didn't really need. And that cost that repair shop $60,000. Now, for many years, sting operations were suspended under my predecessors because they don't involve big money. You know, the attorneys general like to do big, complex, multi-million-dollar fraud cases. But I believe that even though these cases don't involve a lot of money, they affect all of our lives, because if the message gets out that the next person through the door may be from the Attorney General's office, someone who's tempted to cheat you may not do that. And so I think that's an important reason. So we've resumed sting operations in many areas. And then when I spoke about consumer protection, I talked especially about protecting seniors. So when I took office, I started something called the Task Force Against Senior Abuse, also known as TASA. And I did it in a way to not cost the taxpayers any more money. It was a reorganization where we have, in every section, we have somebody who would be there anyway to do prosecutions, who becomes an expert in senior abuse. And then we set up a hotline, so you can call in, and the woman who answers the phone then can refer you to the right section. It could be fraud, it could be consumer fraud, it could be access fraud, it could be outreach, where Madison works, and so on. And in fact, Madison works on TASA. And the phone number is easy to remember. It's a 602 number, and it's 542, which is the Capital Exchange, and it's 2124. And it's easy to remember because 21 is the drinking age, and 24 is what the drinking age should be. 2,000 calls come in and refer them for vigorous prosecution. And so we're doing everything we can to protect the most vulnerable people in our society. Well, that's a report on the 4 priorities that I spoke about the last time I was here. I want to talk to you a little bit about what I'm doing to protect Arizona from the federal government. I'm sure there isn't anybody in this room who is not unhappy about what happened in the presidential election last year. And the results could be disastrous. You know, now we're looking at the fight over gun control. Imagine gun control proposals from the same people that brought us Fast and Furious. We have to be sure to defeat those proposals. One of the things about President Obama is when he can't get his agenda through Congress, which ever since we've had a Republican House he can't do, he starts doing it by executive fiat. And there's a word for that, and it's not democracy. But the protection against that is the 10th Amendment, which, as I'm sure all of you know, the 10th Amendment is the one that provides that those powers not expressly given to the federal government are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And the first line of defense on the 10th Amendment are the state attorneys general. And because Arizona is on the cutting edge of a lot of these issues, my job is especially interesting, and I have been and will continue to be a strong champion of the 10th Amendment in our courts. So, an example of the success I've had is, some of you remember the issue of card check. Obama couldn't get card check through Congress. Imagine people, instead of getting laborers on union elections, instead of getting a secret ballot, the union bosses could come and intimidate them into signing the card and win the election that way. Imagine if in our political elections we didn't have secret ballots and people could come intimidate us and make us sign cards. So 4 states, including Arizona, passed constitutional amendments saying that our workers have a constitutional right to a secret ballot in union elections. Well, the National Labor Relations Board, doing the bidding of the Obama administration, wrote a letter to the 4 states saying that if we did agree not to enforce that law, they would sue us. Well, the 4 of us wrote a letter back, which the 4 of us signed, all 4 attorneys general, saying we would not be intimidated, we were going to enforce the laws passed by our legislators and our voters, because these were referenda. Well, the National Labor Relations Board had promised to sue 4 states, but they only sued 1. Guess which one? Arizona. So it became my job to defend workers' rights to a secret ballot for the entire country. And I obtained summary judgment against the National Labor Relations Board protecting the rights of workers to have a free ballot. I have personally argued in every court you can think of, in the Arizona Superior Court, in the Arizona Supreme Court, Federal District Court, 9th Circuit, as I mentioned to you, twice in the United States Supreme Court in a 5-month period. Now, the Arizona Republic, which, as some of you know, have been attacking me viciously, because when I was elected for the first time in at least 12 years, we had all Republican statewide offices. The Attorney General's office was in the hand of the Democrats for 12 years. And they don't like that, and they're after me. And one of the things they criticize me for is that I'm leading from the front and going to court and arguing cases myself. And they say I should just be an administrator in an ivory tower and let other people do it. And I don't agree with them, because the first word in an attorney general is attorney, and I believe in leading from the front. And I will continue to go into court and set an example to the other lawyers in the Attorney General's office, because I inherited an office which, under the Democrats, who had a reputation for forcing government agencies into bad settlements and consent decrees. And the message I'm sending to the lawyers in the Attorney General's office is that we will not agree to bad settlements and we will not agree to consent decrees. We're hungry to go to court to fight for the people of Arizona. Thank you very much.
I've got 2 questions. And none of these are an attack, it's just for information purposes only.
It's okay, I'm used to being attacked.
I wouldn't attack you anyway.
You still stand.
All right. The redistricting that we have in Arizona, that's been a problem ever since they did the Voters' Rights Act, which is an oxymoron, is going to the Supreme Court to be relooked at.
I think you're talking about pre-clearance.
Right.
Yes.
If that gets overturned like it really should be, things in Arizona will hopefully go back to where they should have been, to where the legislature and the governor redistricts Arizona and not the federal government. Do you have anything to say over that? And then I got one more after this.
Yes. Actually, they're two two separate topics that you've raised, and I have a lot to say about each one of them. So the first one is pre-clearance. That's the case that is the Alabama case that was just argued at the U.S. Supreme Court that deals with pre-clearance. My office wrote the primary friend of court brief in that case, which a number of other states then joined in our brief. So we're the primary, other than Alabama itself, we're the primary briefing to the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act should be declared unconstitutional. Now, what are we talking about? In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and it provided that for states in the Deep South that had a long history of stopping African Americans from voting, any changes they made would have to be pre-cleared with the federal government. They would have to submit in advance and get a pre-clearance for any law that might affect voting. This was brought to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court recognized this was a very drastic remedy in our federal system for states to have to ask for federal government permission. But they approved it because it dealt with a drastic problem, which was a long history of preventing African Americans from voting in the Deep South, and they approved it for a limited period of time. Now, fast forward to 1975, when we had the worst Congress in history. It was the post-Watergate Congress, very heavily Democratic Congress. And they passed an amendment to the Voting Rights Act that said that in addition to dealing with the states in the Deep South that had discriminated against African Americans, we were going to include states with language minorities. And so they said if you over 5% of your population belonged to a language minority and you did not have bilingual voting by 1972, you would be included in this pre-clearance scheme. Now, the bill was passed in 75, so why did they set the date in 72? Answer, because Arizona adopted bilingual voting in 1974, and it was reverse engineered to include Arizona. Now, in addition to that, the way they measured the 5% was irrational, because a number of people that are really language minorities in Arizona are less than 2%. But they didn't measure it by language ability, they measured it by having a Hispanic last name. Well, there are a lot of people with Hispanic last names who speak perfect English, including my chief of staff and the chief of my criminal division and so on. So, but by doing that, they got us over 5%. So that was irrational. And then this thing just kept getting renewed, although it was supposed to be for a limited period of time. So here we are, over a third of a century later, and Arizona is still being punished for having adopted bilingual voting, which I'm against anyway, in 1974 rather than 1972, and we're still being punished for it. And you're talking about a tremendous burden. I have 2 lawyers and a paralegal who spend full-time part of the year, because 40 or 50 bills a year. If you move a precinct across the street, you have to go to the federal government and ask, Mommy, may I, and get permission from the federal government in a federal system where we're supposed to have sovereignty. So we have filed a friend of the court brief, the leading friend of the court brief, and I think Alabama is going to win that case and have Section 5 declared unconstitutional. If they don't, we have our own suit ready to go to say that as applied to Arizona it's unconstitutional. But I think Arizona's going to win that, Alabama's going to win that case, and Section 5 will be declared unconstitutional. Now, that's half of your question.
Yeah, well,
the other half of your question was on redistricting, which is a different subject.
Yeah, because that's,
right
now we're supposed to be set for 10 years.
Right. Arizona had adopted by initiative a redistricting commission of 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and an independent. Well, what happened was, I assume everybody here is, or almost everybody is Republican, we Republicans were caught flat-footed. Because the Democrats went out and recruited liberal independents to apply, and the Republican Party just went right by us, and there were no independents that applied for the position that were not liberals. So we ended up with a very liberal independent as the deciding factor, Colleen Mathis. And she got together with the Democrats to rig the system. And when I say to rig the system, for example, the Redistricting Commission had a tradition of that the Republicans have a lawyer and the Democrats have a lawyer. So the Democrats chose their lawyer, and then the Republicans said, well, we want Lisa Hauser. And the two Democrats and the Liberal Independents said, no, the lawyer representing the Republicans will be, what's his name? He was Joe Canfield. So they imposed a lawyer on the Republicans that they hadn't wanted because they had the 3 votes, the Liberal and the... So that was already a sign that something was wrong. Then I started hearing through the legislature from the 2 Republican members that the 2 Democrats and the Liberal Independent were violating the open meeting law, and that they were getting together and arranging things, you know, including hiring a consulting firm that had only done work for Democrats in the past, that was ready to screw the Republicans. And so I brought a legal action to put a stop to the violation of the open meeting law. The trial judge ruled, first of all, disqualified me because my office had trained the Redistricting Commission in the open meeting law. We told them what not to do, and then they went ahead and did it, and we sought to enforce it. The trial judge said that was a conflict, which it's not, but to appeal that decision would have taken too long. So I headed the case over to Bill Montgomery, the Maricopa County Attorney. And then the trial judge ruled that the open meeting law doesn't apply to the Redistricting Commission. Now this is the initiative that promised great transparency in redistricting. That, you know, the legislature did it behind the scenes without transparency. Why didn't it apply? Because when the initiative was passed, it didn't say that the open meeting law would apply. Well, before I was disqualified, I did the briefing and I wrote that if no laws applied unless they're specified, then the nepotism law and the bribery law wouldn't apply, and because they aren't mentioned, so these guys could hire their sister and take bribes. And the trial judge, when he wrote his decision, said, well, there's no, in answer to my argument, said, there's no allegation of bribery or nepotism here. Missing the whole point, which was that the mere fact that you don't make a law apply doesn't mean that it doesn't apply, but normal laws do apply. And eventually the Court of Appeals agreed with me and ruled this open meeting law does apply, but by then it was too late. And we had our districts, which are crazy, as you guys have experienced. And even though we had an 11% majority for Romney in the state, it's 5-4 Democrat versus Republican in the congressional representation because of the machinations of the Redistricting Commission. So that's 2 long answers to your short question.
Next one.
Yeah.
Quick one.
This one I'll give a short answer to, so I'll give it a chance.
I don't know if you can, but we'll try.
Yeah.
How is it possible in this day and age that any level of government, the federal government, can go to, like, let's say, federal prison and release prisoners that are still doing time, still being convicted, and not tell the state or the county or yourself?
Well, you're talking about the release of illegal aliens now.
How is this possible that you guys don't know about what's going on and still be legal?
You know, I can give a short answer to this. Your guess is as good as mine.
How
I have no idea.
How isn't somebody in the state arresting a federal employee?
Well, we can't do that.
Why not? Are they not breaking state law?
Well, you have to remember Article 6 of the Constitution provides for federal supremacy. So we have to elect better officials. If we had elected Romney, this would not have happened. These guys don't get their job by inheritance, they get their job by election, and it's up to us to elect the right people.
So this can keep going on, and you don't have any control?
Until I don't have any control of that, no, I'm sorry.
Next question.
Yes, some time ago, I contacted the governor. I let her know that we have more retired veterans in this state than almost any other state.
That's correct.
I also let her know.
Just a second, Madison knows these numbers. Aren't we actually first in the country, or at least We're second to California, maybe. I think we're second to California.
Yeah, correct.
And first in percentage.
Right.
That's right.
And I basically said to protect our borders, and in case of our National Guard is called to active duty, that we have a state militia. Now, Oregon has one, Washington has one, Idaho has one, and they're all state militia besides the National Guard. I told her that veterans would be glad to join this organization controlled by the state attorney general to help support and defend our state.
You can give me control of the militia.
Yes.
You're feeding my Walter Mitty fantasies.
So, I've talked to many of these veterans.
You know, this is the problem with Alexander Hamilton. I just want to tell you one quick historical story, I'm sorry, but the reason that Thomas Jefferson, who was the first Democrat, was elected president was because Alexander Hamilton turned against John Adams. And the reason he turned against him was because Adams wouldn't go to war against France, and Hamilton wanted to be the leader to lead the military in the war against France. So that's our proposal, making me the head of the militia. Go ahead.
But these veterans would be willing to take time at no pay and supply their own equipment to go ahead and guard our borders. The individual advising the governor said, we can't do that, we got a National Guard. We have a National Guard, yes, but we can still have a state militia. Why not?
I don't know of any reason why not. I will tell you that in recognition of the contributions that veterans can make, when I proposed that we have at least one person in every school who's trained to use a gun and can have a gun in school to stop some madman that might get in there, the teachers union came out against me and attacked me personally and said there are going to be accidents and there are going to be all these things. And I said, you know, I bet almost every school there's a veteran or a retired policeman or somebody who's already well trained, and we're going to provide additional training so that our schools can have some protection. So I'm hoping that we can make use of our veterans in that way. I need to give somebody else a chance. Other questions?
By the way, we got four retired generals in the state. I don't know how many colonels, and I sure as heck don't know how many command sergeant majors, and other NCOs that would all be willing to join this.
Right on. Okay.
I would like to know, and I guess with the Medicaid expansion that the government is proposing, we've passed some laws in Arizona against things like that, like Prop 106, and I'm wondering, you know, the 10th Amendment, how all that comes into play, and the idea of limited government among Republicans.
Well, the 10th Amendment does come into play because you remember I said when I became Attorney General, one of the first things I did was to join the Defense Against 1070. One of the second things I did was to join the constitutional action against Obamacare, which was led by Florida, and I joined in that case. And we had, you know, we had a big loss there, but we had some victories. And one of our victories was the provision that said that if you don't expand Medicaid, you lose all your Medicaid dollars, which is in the billions. And for the first time in history, the U.S. Supreme Court said that the power of the federal government to intimidate states by threatening to remove funding had its limits, and that this exceeded the limits. So you could say, well, you don't get increased funding. You don't get increased funding for Medicaid if you don't expand Medicaid, but you can't say you're going to take away all the Medicaid funding if you don't expand it, because that gives the federal government too much ability to coerce the states. And so, so that was an important victory that we won in that case. So at least it's our choice. Under the bill as originally passed, it would have been forced. And then it's no longer a legal issue, it's a political issue. Okay, so my friend who came from California said he wouldn't sign my petition.
I signed your petition.
Thank you. You wanted to wait till I spoke to see if he was going to sign. Francis.
Tom, I just want to say I know you almost 30 years.
That's right.
And I am I'm so proud of you.
Thank you, Francis, that's very nice. Come to you.
Another question? Well, a real quick one. I have a wacky question.
Yeah.
I received an email, yeah, I'm from California. I received an email that said there was a provision in Obamacare brought forth in Nevada that protected our Second Amendment rights. I won't get into specifics, but do you know anything about that? I tend not to believe emails until they're
Yeah,
verified.
right. No, I don't know anything about
Okay.
it. Okay, so if you haven't signed my petition, please see Brett or Madison, and if you're not getting my emails, give your email address to them, and we'll add you to our list. Yes?
I have one question about the case that you're going to be presenting.
In a week. Yeah, a week from today.
Yes. Will you be discussing the federal registration form that we use vote?
Yes.
They do not have to require
That's exactly what I'm going to be arguing.
where with our state we do.
This, on the state form, you have to give evidence of citizenship. The federal form, which anybody can ask for, and then you have to give it to them. The Ninth Circuit said we can't ask for evidence of citizenship. So anyone who wants to vote fraudulent, I mean, everybody's been using the state form, but now everybody wants to vote fraudulently will ask for the federal form. And so I'm going to be arguing to the Supreme Court that we have a right as a state to say, even if you use the federal form, we have a right to not register you unless you give evidence of citizenship. That's exactly what my argument will be. Thank you all very much. Okay, last call real quick for the 50-50.
$5 each on these books about Agenda 21, and I have a few here. If anybody wants them, please see me.
Okay, also last call for the 50-50, anyone?